For 18 months, Alpha King Chad Stone had been dreaming of butterflies. Not the idle, forgettable dreams that fade with morning light. These were vivid, prophetic visions that woke him gasping in the dead hours. His mate Bond aching with a pain he hadn't felt since Serafina died 3 years ago. Every night the same vision. A moonlit meadow filled with monarch butterflies that glowed from within, their wings casting patterns of light across mist-shrouded ground. And always, a voice calling his name, feminine, urgent, achingly familiar. Wait, do you think Olivia is really talking to spirits? Or is something even stranger happening? And when Chad discovers what his dead mate has been trying to tell him for 3 years, will it destroy him or save him? Listen, this story is about to take you on a supernatural journey that will leave you breathless. We're talking ancient magic, conspiracy, betrayal, and a romance that literally bridges the world of what the butterflies are actually saying. This story gets more intense with every line. And trust me, the revelations will blow your mind. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch every mystical moment. Let's dive into the spirit world together. He would reach for the butterflies, trying to understand what they wanted, trying to grasp the message hovering just beyond comprehension. And every time, he would wake before understanding came, left with nothing but the phantom ache of a mate, Bond that should have died with Serafina. Chad had told no one about the dreams. An Alpha King didn't admit to visions, didn't confess to hearing voices, didn't show weakness that could be exploited by rivals or enemies. But the dreams were getting worse. So when his head scout, Finn Ravencroft, delivered the report with barely concealed amusement, Chad's attention sharpened despite himself. "There's a woman," Finn said, standing at attention in Chad's office, living alone in a cottage at the eastern border. "The patrols say she's unusual." "Define unusual," Chad said flatly, not looking up from the territory maps spread across his desk. "She talks to herself, my king. Or rather, she talks to the forest. Trees, wind, animals." Finn paused. "Butterflies, mostly. Yesterday she spent 3 hours having what looked like an animated conversation with a cloud of monarchs near Whispering Creek." Chad's hand stilled on the map. "Monarchs? The same ones from his dreams. Is she a threat?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. "No, sir. Eccentric, but harmless. The cottage is barely standing. She seems to survive on foraged herbs and, honestly, my king, I'm not sure how she survives at all." Chad should have dismissed it. Should have sent Finn away with orders to monitor, but not engage. He had a territory to run, a pack of 2,000 wolves to lead, political alliances to maintain. But that night, the dream came again. Only this time, when the voice called his name, he finally recognized it. Serafina, his dead mate, calling to him from beyond the veil. He woke with tears on his face and a decision crystallizing in his chest. The next evening, Chad rode out alone despite his beta Garrett Blackwood's protests. "A king doesn't chase stories about mad women and butterflies," Garrett argued, following Chad to the stables. "A king investigates threats to his territory," Chad countered, saddling his black stallion. "She's not a threat," Finn said. "I know what Finn said." Chad swung into the saddle. "I'm going anyway." Garrett studied him with the frankness of a 20-year friendship. "This is about dreams, isn't it?" Chad met his beta's eyes. "Don't wait up." The cottage appeared abandoned at first glance. Thatched roof patched with moss, wooden walls weathered grey, windows dark. But the garden told a different story. Herbs grew in careful spirals, night-blooming flowers clustered near the door, and wind chimes made from bones and crystals hung from the eaves, singing softly in the evening breeze. Chad's wolf stirred uneasily within him, sensing something his human mind couldn't quite grasp. a humming energy that made his skin prickle with awareness. He found her exactly where Finn's report described, in the meadow beyond the cottage, where Whispering Creek babbled over smooth stones and the setting sun painted everything gold. She sat cross-legged in the grass, wild auburn hair catching the light, and she was indeed talking to butterflies. Dozens of them, monarchs and swallowtails and painted ladies, swirled around her in patterns too deliberate to be random. They landed on her outstretched hands, her shoulders, even her hair, and she spoke to them in a gentle voice that carried clearly in the quiet evening air. "I know you're worried," she was saying, her tone as serious as if she were addressing the royal council. "But he's not ready yet. The veil is still too strong and he carries too much guilt. You have to be patient." Chad froze at the tree line, watching as the butterflies seemed to respond to her words, their formation shifting and reforming like a living kaleidoscope. "Yes, I know time is running short," she continued, urgency creeping into her voice. "The darkness is growing stronger. But if we push too hard, we'll lose him entirely. And then everything our families died for will have been for nothing. Our families died for." The words hit Chad like a physical blow. He stepped forward without thinking. A twig snapped under his boot. The woman's head whipped around with supernatural speed. Her eyes, when they met his, were the color of aged whiskey shot through with flecks of gold, and they held a depth of knowing that made him feel exposed, seen in a way he hadn't experienced since Seraphine's death. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The butterflies continued their dance between them like a bridge made of wings and autumn colors. Then she smiled, sad and knowing and somehow terrifying in its certainty. "Hello, Chad," she said in a voice that resonated with power. "Seraphina has been waiting for you to find me." "We all have." Chad's wolf surged forward, protective and aggressive in equal measure. He felt his eyes flash gold as his alpha authority flooded the clearing. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice dropping to the dangerous growl that made even his strongest warriors step back. "How do you know that name? How do you know anything about my mate?" But the woman didn't flinch, didn't show even a flicker of the fear that should have been instinctive in the presence of an alpha king, barely maintaining control. Instead, she stood gracefully, and the butterflies lifted with her, forming a crown of beating wings above her head that caught the dying light like stained glass. "My name is Olivia Rochi," she said quietly, and even that simple introduction sent shivers down his spine, because he knew that name, knew it from old stories his grandmother had told him about, the ancient bloodlines, the ones that had died out generations ago. "And I know about Seraphina," Olivia continued, "because she's standing right beside you, Chad. She has been for the past 3 years, trying desperately to warn you about what's coming. But you've been too wrapped up in guilt and grief to hear her." Olivia tilted her head, her gaze shifting to focus on empty air just to his left, and her expression softened with compassion. "She says you need to stop blaming yourself for the accident. She says the brakes were cut, that it wasn't your fault, and that she's forgiven you for the argument you had that morning, the one you've replayed in your mind every single day since." The world tilted sideways. Chad staggered, his breath coming in short gasps, because nobody knew about that argument. Nobody knew about the stupid, pointless fight they'd had about wedding traditions and pack politics. The last words he'd spoken to her before she'd driven off in anger and never come home. Nobody knew that he'd been too proud to call her, too stubborn to apologize, and that she'd died thinking he was angry with her. "You're lying," he rasped. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There was too much certainty in her eyes, too much detail in her words. Olivia's expression grew fierce, protective in a way that reminded him of Seraphina herself. She says you gave her a silver bracelet on your first anniversary, one you had specially made with both your pack symbols intertwined. She wore it every day, even though the clasp was broken and it kept falling off. She says you used to tease her about fixing it, and she would laugh and tell you that some things were perfect in their imperfection. Chad's knees nearly buckled. The bracelet. Gods. The bracelet that had been found at the accident site. Somehow thrown clear when everything else had been destroyed. He'd kept it in a locked box by his bed, unable to look at it, unable to throw it away. She says, Olivia continued, her voice gentling, that she needs you to listen now. Really listen. Because the same people who killed her are planning something much worse, and you're the only one who can stop them. Okay, pause. Can we just acknowledge that Chad went from "this woman is crazy" to "my dead mate is actually talking through her" in like 60 seconds? That's some fast character development, people. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We're about to dive into ancient bloodlines, conspiracy, necromancy, and a love story that literally crosses between worlds. Hit that subscribe button before the spirits come for you next. Just kidding, mostly. The next line is where things get really mystical and you won't want to miss it. Chad found himself sitting on the ground without remembering how he got there. His hands shaking as 3 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled around him. I don't understand, he whispered, and he hated how broken he sounded, how much like the devastated mate he'd been in the immediate aftermath, rather than the strong king he'd forced himself to become. What are you? How is this possible? Olivia sat down across from him, close enough that he could see the swirl of colors in her eyes, the way they seemed to shift and change like looking into deep water. The butterflies settled around them in a protective circle, and in the gathering darkness, they began to glow with a soft bioluminescence that definitely wasn't natural. I'm what's called a spirit listener, Olivia explained, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting ancient history. It's an old bloodline gift, one that most people think died out centuries ago. We can hear the voices of those who've passed beyond the veil, communicate with the spirits that linger between worlds. And sometimes, if we're strong enough, we can see them too. She gestured to the space beside him, and Chad found himself turning to look, even though he knew he'd see nothing but empty air. Seraphina has been trying to reach you through dreams, through signs, through anything she could manage. But the veil is strong, and you've been blocking her out with guilt. So she found me instead. Why you? Chad asked, and he heard the accusation in his own voice, the irrational anger of a grieving mate who wanted to blame someone, anyone, for the fact that he couldn't hear his own beloved. But Olivia didn't take offense. She simply looked at him with those ancient eyes and said, because my parents were killed by the same people who killed Seraphina, and because their spirits led her to me. Because this is bigger than just one death or one pack, Chad. There's a conspiracy that's been growing in the shadows for decades, and it's about to come to fruition in a way that will destroy everything the old bloodlines built. Over the next hour, as true darkness fell and the meadow filled with spirits that Chad couldn't see but could somehow feel pressing against his awareness, Olivia told him everything. She explained how she'd been born into the Roche line, one of the last families to carry the spirit listener gift, how her parents Vincent and Eleanor Roche had been researching something dangerous in the months before their deaths. Something about forbidden magic and old packs that should have stayed buried. They were killed in what was ruled an accidental house fire when I was 17, Olivia said, her voice steady but her eyes haunted. I was at university 3 hours away. By the time I got home, there was nothing left but ashes. And no one investigated? Chad asked, his alpha instincts immediately suspicious. They did. The fire marshal ruled it electrical failure. Case closed, Olivia's smile was bitter. But I could still hear them, Chad, my parents' spirits. They told me it was murder. They told me to run, to hide, to stay away from the pack. Did you? For a while. But the pack, they didn't take kindly to my claims that I could still speak to my dead parents. They called me mad, unstable. A few thought I was possessed. She looked away. I was cast out, labeled insane, forced to survive on the fringes of pack territory where nobody wanted to acknowledge my existence. Chad felt something cold and furious settle in his chest. Who ordered your exile? It doesn't matter now. What matters is that the spirits never stopped talking. My parents kept investigating even after death, kept gathering information. And 3 years ago, they made contact with Seraphine's spirit right after she crossed over. Olivia met his eyes. That's when we started to understand the pattern. The way certain wolves with specific bloodline gifts were being systematically eliminated, made to look like accidents or natural causes. She leaned forward. Your mate wasn't killed because of anything she did, Chad. She was killed because of what she was, because she carried the healer's touch in her bloodline. And someone is collecting us, eliminating anyone who might be able to stop what they're planning. Chad felt his alpha rage building, felt his wolf demanding blood and vengeance. But he forced himself to stay focused. Who? He growled, and the word came out with enough power that the trees around them shuddered. Give me names, and I'll tear them apart myself. But Olivia shook her head, her expression grim. It's not that simple. The people behind this are well hidden, protected by layers of manipulation and misdirection. But Serafina and my parents have been gathering clues. They think the conspiracy reaches into your own council. Someone close to you, someone you trust, has been feeding information to the enemy. The trail cut deep. But Chad had been an alpha long enough to know that power always attracted corruption. Tell me everything you know, he commanded. And this time it wasn't a request, but a direct order backed by alpha authority. Olivia's eyes flashed in response, and for the first time, he felt the pushback of real power, not werewolf dominance, but something older, something that made his wolf sit up and take notice. I don't answer to your authority, King Chad, she said quietly, but there was no disrespect in it, only a statement of fact. I answer to the spirits and to the old laws that predate pack hierarchies. But I'll help you because our goals align. Because Serafina asks me to. And because I'm tired of hiding while good people die. What do you think is really going on? Who do you suspect might be the traitor on Chad's council? Drop your theories in the comments. They talked until the moon rose high overhead. Olivia relaying messages from Serafina that made Chad laugh and cry in equal measure. Small, intimate details that proved beyond doubt that his mate's spirit was really there, really trying to help him. She told him about the silver scar on his ribs from a training accident when he was 12. About the way he hummed, off-key in the shower. About the secret fear he'd confessed to her one night. That he wasn't good enough to be king. That he would fail his people. And through it all, Olivia watched him with a mixture of compassion and sadness, as if she understood exactly how much it hurt to be so close to someone you loved, and yet unable to truly reach them. Why can't I hear her myself? Chad finally asked, and the question came out raw with longing. If she's really here, why do I need you as an intermediary? Olivia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Because you're blocking yourself with guilt, Chad. The mate bond doesn't just disappear when one partner dies. It transforms, becomes a bridge between worlds. But only if both sides are open to it. You've been punishing yourself so thoroughly that you've walled off that part of your soul. Serafina can feel your grief like a physical barrier between you. Then help me, Chad said. And he didn't care that he was begging, didn't care that he was showing weakness to a woman he'd just met. Teach me to hear her. I need to tell her I'm sorry. I need her to know that I never stopped loving her. Olivia reached out and took his hand, her skin warm and alive in a way to acutely aware of how cold he'd been feeling for years. I can try, she promised. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Opening yourself to the spirit world when you've been closed off for so long requires breaking down, was begging, didn't care that he was showing weakness to a woman he'd just met. Teach me to hear her. I need to tell her I'm sorry. I need her to know that I never stopped loving her. Olivia reached out and took his hand, her skin warm and alive in a way to acutely aware of how cold he'd been feeling for years. I can try, she promised. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Opening yourself to the spirit world when you've been closed off for so long requires breaking down walls you've built for protection. It's going to hurt, Chad. It's going to force you to feel everything you've been avoiding. I don't care, he said fiercely. I'll do whatever it takes. And so began the strangest and most painful education of Chad's life. Every evening for the next 2 weeks, he would return to Olivia's cottage, and she would guide him through meditations and exercises designed to open his spiritual awareness. She taught him to quiet his mind, to stop the constant churn of guilt and responsibility and just be present in the moment. She showed him how to recognize the subtle signs of spiritual presence, the way the air would shift, the way his mate bond would warm even though Serafina was gone from the physical world. The process was excruciating. Every session brought up memories he'd buried, forced him to confront the depth of his loss all over again. He would leave Olivia's cottage emotionally shattered, barely able to maintain his composure until he was alone, in his chambers where he could finally break down. But he kept coming back, because gradually, incrementally, he guilt and responsibility and just be present in the moment. She showed him how to recognize the subtle signs of spiritual presence, the way the air would shift, the way his mate bond would warm, even though Serafina was gone from the physical world. The process was excruciating. Every session brought up memories he'd buried, forced him to confront the depth of his loss all over again. He would leave Olivia's cottage emotionally shattered, barely able to maintain his composure until he was alone, started to feel something changing. The dreams became clearer, less chaotic. He began to sense a presence hovering at the edge of his awareness, warm and familiar and achingly beloved. And through it all, he found himself increasingly aware of Olivia herself. She was nothing like Serafina, nothing like any woman he'd ever known. Where Serafina had been warm sunshine and easy laughter, Olivia was moonlight, and mysteries comfortable with darkness, in a way that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. She moved through the world with quiet confidence, utterly unbothered by the isolation that had been forced upon her. She found companionship in spirits and nature that most people couldn't perceive. She was brilliant and strange and occasionally terrifying, especially when her eyes would go distant, and she would relay messages from spirits who had been dead for centuries, speaking with the authority of someone who walked between worlds as easily as others walked between rooms. His pack noticed the changes in him, of course. Garrett cornered him after a council meeting 3 weeks into his training with Olivia, concern written all over his beta's face. "You've been disappearing every evening for weeks," Garrett said bluntly. "And you come back looking like you've been through a war. What's going on, Chad? Is this about that woman the scouts reported?" Chad had debated how much to tell his inner circle, how much they would even believe. But he'd learned long ago that leadership required trust. So he told Garrett everything about Olivia's gift, about Seraphine's spirit, about the conspiracy targeting gifted bloodlines. He watched his beta's expression cycle through disbelief, shock, and finally grim acceptance. "A spirit listener," Garrett said slowly, testing the words. like in the old stories. And you believe her. You believe Serafina is really communicating through her. Chad met his friend's eyes steadily. She knows things nobody else could know, Garrett. Private things, intimate details that died with Serafina. And more than that, I can feel it. My mate Bond is responding to something, warming in ways it hasn't since she died. He paused. Either Olivia is the most elaborate con artist in history, or she's exactly what she claims to be. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. If you trust her, then I trust her. But Chad, if there really is a conspiracy, if someone on the council is involved, we need to be careful. We can't let anyone know what you're investigating. Chad nodded grimly. I know. That's why I need you to start doing some quiet research. Look into the deaths Olivia mentioned, the ones that were ruled accidents. See if you can find any patterns, any connections we might have missed. His beta's expression hardened with determination. Consider it done. And Chad, if someone really did kill Serafina, if this wasn't just a tragic accident, I want to be there when you make them pay. Listen, if you think this is intense, just wait until Chad finally breaks through and sees Seraphine's spirit for the first time. I'm talking full-on supernatural reunion that will absolutely wreck your emotions. Make sure you're subscribed because the next line is where everything changes. We're going from maybe spirits are real to oh my God, they're everywhere. Hit that button. Your heart needs to be ready for what's coming, and I need you here for the journey. Let's go. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Chad finally broke through. He was sitting across from Olivia in her cottage, the space between them filled with candles and herbs that she said helped thin the veil. When suddenly the world shifted. It wasn't a visual change, exactly more like a sixth sense clicking into place. Like a door opening in his mind that had been locked for years. And suddenly he could see her. Serafina. She was translucent and glowing softly, but it was unmistakably her standing in the corner of the cottage, with tears streaming down her incorporeal face. Chad, she breathed, and her voice sounded like wind chimes and distant bells. Oh, my love, you can finally hear me. Chad surged to his feet, instinct driving him toward her, even though his rational mind knew he couldn't touch her. Couldn't hold her the way he desperately wanted to. Serafina, he choked out, and 3 years of grief came pouring out in that single word. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry for that fight. For not calling you. For letting you die thinking I was angry. I would give anything to take it back. Anything to have you here again. But Serafina was shaking her head. Her ghostly form moving with the grace he remembered so well. No, my heart, no. You have to stop carrying this guilt. What happened wasn't your fault. The brakes on my car were cut, Chad. Someone murdered me, and they did it, because they knew it would break you, would make you too consumed with grief to notice what they were planning. The revelation should have shocked him, but after weeks of preparation with Olivia, he'd already suspected as much. What broke him was seeing the certainty in Seraphine's eyes, the lack of blame, the pure love that radiated from her even in death. I miss you, he whispered. Every day, every moment. I don't know how to do this without you. Serafina floated closer, and even though he couldn't feel her touch, he sensed the intention of it, the ghostly caress against his cheek. You're not without me, she said softly. I'm always here, always watching over you. But Chad, you have to let me go. Not forget me, never that. But release the guilt that's poisoning you. Because you have work to do, and you can't do it while you're still chained to the past. What work? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. Seraphine's form flickered, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of prophecy. The one who killed me is planning to tear down the veil between the living and the dead, to raise an army of spirits bound to his will. He wants to overthrow the natural order, to make himself immortal by enslaving those who've passed beyond. She turned to look at Olivia, who had been sitting silently through this reunion, her expression carefully neutral. If he succeeds, he won't just destroy the werewolf world, Chad. He'll unravel the fabric of life, and death itself. That's why I led you to Olivia. She's the only spirit listener strong enough to help you stop this. And she's the only person in the world who understands what you're facing. Chad looked at Olivia, too, really looked at her, and saw the strength beneath her quiet exterior, the determination in the set of her jaw. "Will you help me?" he asked, and the question was far bigger than just investigating a conspiracy. He was asking if she would stand with him against forces that terrified even the dead. If she would risk everything to stop a threat most people couldn't even perceive. Olivia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said quietly. "Every spirit I've ever spoken to, every message I've received, it's all been leading to this moment. So yes, Chadstone, I'll help you save the world." Over the following weeks, they worked together to unravel the conspiracy that had been growing in the shadows. Olivia would enter deep meditative trances, communicating with spirits who had witnessed conversations and events that the living had thought were secret. Serafina and Olivia's parents acted as their primary investigators on the other side of the veil, gathering information and identifying the key players in the plot. What they discovered was far worse than Chad had imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about power or territory. It was about a forbidden ritual that required the blood of specific bloodlines, families who carried ancient gifts like spirit listening, healing touch, prophetic dreams, and elemental control. The orchestrator had been systematically eliminating these bloodlines for decades, harvesting their essence at the moment of death to fuel a spell that would give him dominion over the spirit world. "He's been killing us for 40 years, Olivia said one evening, spreading out ancient texts she'd inherited from her parents. "And he's nearly ready. Only a few." "How many victims?" Chad asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "At least 60 that we've confirmed, probably more." The number made his blood run cold. "And the identity of the mastermind?" Olivia looked up and her expression was grim. "That's what we've been trying to determine. The spirits know he's someone with access to your inner circle. Someone who could track and eliminate targets without raising suspicion. But his identity is heavily warded, magically concealed." "What about physical evidence?" Garrett asked. He'd been brought fully into the investigation, along with Commander Finn and Elder Tobias Ashford, the only council members Chad trusted completely. "The ritual requires physical components," Olivia explained. "Items that contain the essence of his victims. If we can find his workshop, we'll have everything we need." Elder Tobias frowned. "A workshop capable of storing 60 souls would require significant space and powerful wards. That's not something you can hide in a bedroom closet." "Which means," Chad said slowly, "we're looking for someone with a private estate. Someone whose home wouldn't be searched or questioned." The list of suspects suddenly became very short. "Do you have any idea who the traitor might be? Drop your guesses in the comments. And if you're loving this supernatural mystery, hit that like button." The identity of the mastermind, when they finally uncovered it, was a betrayal that cut Chad to his core. Dr. William Harper, his royal physician, his father's most trusted advisor, the man who had helped Chad navigate the early days of his kingship after his parents' deaths, the mentor he'd relied on for wisdom and guidance. Harper was a necromancer, a practitioner of the darkest magic, and he'd been hiding in plain sight for over 40 years. He'd orchestrated the deaths of Chad's parents when they'd gotten too close to discovering his true nature. He'd killed Seraphina when her healing touch had accidentally revealed the corruption in his aura during a council meeting where he'd been treating her for a minor injury. And he targeted Olivia's parents when their research had started connecting the pattern of bloodline deaths. "We need proof," Garrett insisted when Chad told his inner circle what they'd discovered. "We can't just accuse a sitting councilman of mass murder and dark magic based on conversations with spirits. The pack will think you've lost your mind." But Olivia had thought of that. "The ritual requires physical components," she explained, spreading out her parents' research. "Harper would need to keep trophies from each kill items that contain the essence of his victims. If we can find his workshop, we'll have everything we need." Breaking into Harper's estate was one of the most dangerous things Chad had ever done. Not because of physical security, he was the Alpha King, after all, but because of the magical wards that protected it. Olivia had to work for hours to dismantle them, calling on friendly spirits to confuse the detection spells while she carefully unraveled Harper's protections. What they found in the hidden basement beneath his study was the stuff of nightmares. Dozens of glass bottles lined the shelves, each one containing what Olivia identified as captured soul fragments, glowing mist that pulsed with trapped consciousness. Personal items from the victims were arranged on an altar. Photographs, jewelry, locks of hair, including Seraphine's broken bracelet, and a family portrait of Olivia's parents. And in the center of it all was a massive grimoire, its pages filled with instructions for the ritual that would tear the veil between worlds. They barely escaped before Harper returned home. That they had what they needed. The evidence was irrefutable, documented in Harper's own hand, with dates and methods and triumphant notes about each successful harvest. Chad called an emergency council meeting, and with Olivia standing beside him and Garrett flanking his other side, he laid out the entire conspiracy for the assembled pack leaders. He showed them the grimoire, the soul bottles, the detailed records of murder. And when Harper tried to deny it, tried to claim the evidence was fabricated, Olivia did something that made even Chad's blood run cold. She called the spirits of the dead forward. And for one terrible, beautiful moment, she made them visible to everyone in the room. Seraphina appeared beside Chad, her hand resting on his shoulder. Olivia's parents manifested behind their daughter, their pride in her evident even in death. And dozens of other victims filled the chamber, all of them pointing accusatory fingers at Harper, all of them demanding justice for lives cut short. The councilman's face went white as corpse flesh, and his carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. "You don't understand," he snarled, dark magic crackling around his hands as he prepared to fight. "The old ways are dying. The bloodline, gifts are fading. I was trying to preserve them, to create something eternal and powerful that would survive when the last of you gifted ones died out." "You were murdering innocent people," Chad roared, his alpha power flooding the room with such intensity that wolves throughout the territory would later report, feeling the urge to submit even from miles away. "You killed my mate. You killed my parents. You destroyed families and called it preservation." The battle that followed was brief, but brutal. Harper was powerful, his necromantic magic fueled by decades of stolen essence. But he was one man against an entire pack of furious werewolves led by a king who had found his purpose again. When it was over, when Harper lay defeated and bound in silver chains that would prevent any further magic use, Chad stood over him with eyes that glowed pure gold. "You're going to spend the rest of your very long life in the deepest cell we have," Chad pronounced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And every single day you're going to feel the weight of what you've done. Because Olivia is going to make sure the spirits of your victims can visit you, can remind you of every life you stole." He turned to his spirit listener, and the look they shared was one of perfect understanding. Two people who had found in each other the strength to face impossible darkness. Can you do that? He asked quietly. Olivia's smile was sharp as a blade. It would be my absolute pleasure. So Harper thought he could just murder 60 people and achieve immortality. Oh, nope. Olivia literally summoned an army of ghosts to testify against him. If that's not the most boss move in supernatural history, I don't know what is. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because the next line is the epilogue, and it's going to show you what happens when an alpha king and a spirit listener build a life together. Spoiler, it's magical. Literally. Hit that button. The aftermath of Harper's exposure and imprisonment was complicated. The pack had to grapple with the revelation that dark magic existed, that spirits were real, and that their king had been communicating with his dead mate for weeks. Some were skeptical. Others are frightened. But most were simply relieved that the threat had been neutralized. Olivia worked tirelessly to help the spirits of Harper's victims find peace, conducting ceremonies that allowed them to say goodbye to their living loved ones and cross over properly. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work, but she approached it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. Chad found himself spending more and more time with her, even after the immediate crisis had passed. What had started as necessity had become genuine friendship, and if he was honest with himself, something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. She challenged him in ways no one else did, called him on his shit when he slipped back into guilt patterns, made him laugh with her dry observations about pack politics and her utterly bizarre conversations with long-dead wolves who had opinions about everything. She was brilliant and infuriating, and completely unimpressed by his title, treating him like a person rather than a king. And he'd forgotten how refreshing that could be. One evening, about 2 months after Harper's defeat, Chad returned to Olivia's cottage to find it transformed. She'd cleaned and repaired the structure, added new gardens, and most surprisingly, there were other people there. 4 young wolves teenagers by the look of them were sitting in her garden while she taught them meditation techniques. Spirit listeners, she explained when Chad raised a questioning eyebrow. Or potentially anyway. They've all been hearing voices, seeing things others can't. And their packs were starting to turn on them the way mine did to me. I'm teaching them to control and understand their gifts instead of fearing them. Chad felt something warm bloom in his chest as he watched her work patient, and encouraging with these frightened young people who had found in her the mentor they desperately needed. You're building something, he observed. A new tradition. A way to preserve the old bloodline gifts. Olivia looked up at him and there was hope in her eyes that he'd never seen before. I'm trying. I thought if I could gather the surviving gifted ones, teach them to use their abilities properly, maybe we could prevent what Harper feared, not through murder and dark magic, but through community and knowledge. You'll need resources, Chad said immediately, his mind already working through logistics. A proper building, funding, protection. Let me help. Let Ironwood become a sanctuary for the gifted bloodlines. Olivia's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked uncharacteristically vulnerable. You would do that? Even though it would mark your pack as different as the ones who harbor the strange and the supernatural. Chad stepped closer to her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her whiskey-colored eyes, close enough to catch her scent of herbs and night-blooming flowers. Olivia, you saved my pack, helped me bring a murderer to justice, gave me the chance to find peace with Seraphine's death. I would give you anything you asked for. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Then Seraphine's voice, soft and amused, spoke from the space beside them that only Olivia could see. She's right here, you know. Watching you two dance around your feelings has become the most entertaining thing about being dead. Olivia blushed, the color rising in her cheeks in a way Chad found completely endearing. And he couldn't help but laugh, even as his own face heated. Serafina says we're being ridiculous, Olivia reported, and there was shy humor in her voice. She says I should tell you that I've developed feelings for you, and you should tell me that you feel the same way, and we should stop wasting time pretending otherwise. Chad felt his heart stutter, because he hadn't been sure, hadn't wanted to assume, hadn't known if what he felt was real or just gratitude and proximity. But hearing it stated so boldly by his deceased mate, knowing that Serafina not only approved but was actively encouraging this, gave him a courage he hadn't possessed before. Is that true? He asked directly, holding her gaze. Have you developed feelings for me? Olivia bit her lip, a gesture of nervousness, so at odds with her usual confidence that it made him want to pull her close and promise her she never had to be afraid with him. Yes, she admitted quietly. I know it's complicated. I know you loved Serafina, and I would never want to replace her or diminish what you had. But yes, Chad, I have feelings for you. Serafina says she loves you too, Olivia continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. She says that love doesn't end with death, and her loving you doesn't mean you can't love someone else. She says she wants you to be happy, to find joy again, and that she thinks we're perfect for each other, because I understand both the weight you carry and the magic that surrounds our world. Chad reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. I do have feelings for you, he confessed. You're nothing like Serafina, and I think that's what makes this possible. You're not a replacement or a substitute. You're entirely yourself, and I've fallen for the brilliant, strange, powerful woman who talks to butterflies and walks between worlds like it's the most natural thing in existence. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before, familiar and new all at once. Olivia kissed him back with an enthusiasm that made him smile against her lips. And somewhere in the background, he could have sworn he heard Seraphine's delighted laughter, a sound of pure joy that she'd managed to bring these two wounded souls together. They pulled apart eventually, both breathless and smiling, and Olivia whispered, "She's happy. She says this is exactly what she hoped would happen, and she's going to cross over now because she knows you're going to be okay." Chad turned to where he'd learned Seraphine's spirit usually manifested, and even though he still couldn't see her as clearly as Olivia could, he could feel her presence, stronger than ever before. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go. For finding Olivia. For fighting from beyond death to save our pack. I will always love you, Serafina. Always." The temperature in the room shifted, grew warmer, and he felt what could only be described as a ghostly kiss against his forehead. A final blessing from the mate who had defined so much of his life. Then the presence faded, and Chad knew with absolute certainty that Serafina had moved on, had found her peace, leaving him free to build something new. The years that followed were transformative for Ironwood and for Chad personally. Olivia's school for the gifted bloodlines grew from 4 students to over 40, drawing young wolves from across the continent who possessed abilities their own packs didn't understand. She taught them control, helped them embrace rather than fear their gifts, and in doing so created a new generation of wolves who could bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. The old ways weren't dying after all. They were evolving, adapting, becoming stronger through acceptance rather than secrecy. Chad and Olivia's relationship deepened, gradually built on friendship and mutual respect, before it ever became romance. She never tried to be Serafina, never attempted to fill that specific hole in his heart. Instead, she carved out her own space beside it, a different kind of love that was no less profoundful. Being different. They would take walks through the forest where she taught him to sense the spirits that lingered in ancient places, to communicate with the land itself in ways that made him a better king, because he understood the true depth of what he was protecting. On their wedding day, 3 years after they'd first met, the ceremony was attended by both the living and the dead. Olivia had thinned the veil enough that spirits could manifest for those with eyes to see. And Chad's parents stood proudly in the front row alongside Olivia's, all of them beaming with approval. And there, serving as Olivia's spiritual maid of honor, was Serafina, radiant and joyful, proof that love transcended death and that endings could be beginnings in disguise. When the ceremony was complete and Chad kissed his new wife, the spirits erupted in celebration, their joy creating a shower of light that even the non-gifted could perceive, a blessing from the other side for a union that bridged both worlds. Their children, when they came, carried gifts from both bloodlines. The oldest could heal with a touch and hear the whispers of spirits. The middle child could manipulate the elements and predict the future in dreams. The youngest, much to everyone's amusement, could talk to animals and plants with the same ease Olivia spoke to butterflies. Ironwood became known as the pack where the impossible was commonplace, where the gifted were celebrated rather than feared, where the veil between worlds was honored as sacred rather than something to avoid. Chad never forgot Serafina, never stopped honoring her memory, but he also never let grief define him again. Worlds, their children, when they came, carried gifts from both bloodlines. The oldest could heal with a touch and hear the whispers of spirits. The middle child could manipulate the elements and predict the future in dreams. The youngest, much to everyone's amusement, could talk to animals and plants with the same ease Olivia spoke to butterflies. Ironwood became known as the pack where the impossible was commonplace, where the gifted were celebrated rather than feared, where the veil between. He'd learned that love was infinite, that opening his heart to Olivia didn't diminish what he'd felt for his first mate, but rather proved that the heart could expand to hold multiple truths. He'd learned that endings and beginnings often wore the same face, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in the strangest packages, like a woman talking to butterflies in a moonlit meadow, who turned out to be exactly what he needed to find himself again. On quiet evenings, Chad would sometimes find Olivia in their garden, surrounded by monarchs and swallowtails, having animated conversations that he now understood weren't madness, but connection to something most people had forgotten existed. He would watch her with a smile, marveling at the strange path that had brought them together, grateful for a dead woman's love and a living woman's courage, thankful for second chances and for the reminder that magic was real if you only knew how to listen. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the veil between worlds grew thin, he would feel Seraphine's presence nearby, a warm brush against his awareness that felt like approval and blessing. She would never truly be gone. Not as long as he and Olivia kept her memory alive. Not as long as love persisted beyond death's door. It was a strange comfort, knowing that the woman he'd lost was happy for the life he'd built, that in some cosmic way, she'd orchestrated her own replacement by finding him someone who could understand both his grief and his hope. The Alpha King who had once been broken by loss had been remade by love, multiple loves in multiple forms. And in learning to talk to butterflies and spirits and the space between heartbeats, he'd found not just healing, but transcendence. Love and a living woman's courage, thankful for second chances and for the reminder that magic was real if you only knew how to listen. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the veil between worlds grew thin, he would feel Seraphine's presence nearby, a warm brush against his awareness that felt like approval and blessing. She would never truly be gone. Not as long as he and Olivia kept her memory alive. Not as long as lums persisted beyond death's door. It was a strange comfort. The end of one story had become the beginning of another, and Chad had learned to embrace them both, to hold yesterday and tomorrow in the same grateful hands, to understand that some bonds were eternal precisely because they knew when to transform rather than trying to remain unchanged. I have few questions. Would you want the ability to communicate with spirits? Or would it be too painful to never fully say goodbye? Who was your favorite character in this story and why? If you could speak to one deceased loved one, what would you say? If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances and supernatural love. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the first time Chad saw Seraphine's spirit? The tribunal where Olivia summoned an army of ghosts? Or the wedding where both mates blessed his new beginning? Your comments fuel these stories, so let me hear from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? More magical, emotional, boundary-breaking stories are coming, and you don't want to miss a single one. Hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. See you in the next story, believers.